Time. Today we have a very special person on our show. Our own city manager, Jim Bennett. Thank you for coming. Welcome.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, whenever it's going to be taped. But it's good morning for us.
It's good morning for us. It might be cocktail time for our audience.
Well, that sounds like a better thing to be doing.
Yeah, well, I think so too. Jim, thank you for being on the show.
No problem.
Gee, I want the community to know you. I mean, I've watched you at the council meetings, and I've learned a lot during that time, and how hard everybody works, and how everybody on the board has the best interest of the town on their mind. So were you born and raised in Maine, or?
Yeah, I'm a Mainer. I've lived so far my entire life in Maine. I don't plan on leaving Maine. I grew up in Lisbon.
Oh, okay.
So I come from a very blue-collared background. My mom was a hot lunch worker. My dad had a little tiny sheetrocking business. Dad wasn't a big supporter of higher education, so I had to put myself through school. Mm-hmm. Went a couple of years to Bentley College. I was going to be an accountant, and wasn't able to figure out a way to financially make it work for my third year. So I went back home and ran for selectman, which is like a city council, and I actually won. At 21.
At 21 years old?
Yeah, and so I had defeated the chairman of the board, who was running for his fourth term. I think most of it was because of my mom.
Oh yeah.
If I could have put Ginger's boy on the thing, I probably would have gotten more votes. So it was really on my mom's shirt tails, I think, because of everything she had done for the community and what she was part of the community, and then. Worked in the restaurant business, managed an Italian restaurant, local Italian restaurant. It was pretty famous in the States, and went to school basically full-time during the day and finished up my undergrad at USM in business administration and got reelected. And then just barely past my 26th birthday, I got hired my first town manager job in a little town called Dixfield. And so I served a number of communities.
Wow. And at a very young age.
Yeah, I think a lot of people may have been familiar with me because in 1990, as a 30-year-old, I took over after Jerry Plant got done as the town manager in Old Orchard. So I was the town manager in Old Orchard for almost 7 years in the early 90s, and was very much part of that community's rebirth, helping to redo its main street and downtown, and really sort of changing, I think, that community's where that community was going and what it was going to stand for versus what it was before I got there. And that's what the elected officials wanted to do, and we were able to do that.
Where did all this come from? From your childhood? Where did all this?
My mom, I think, basically devoted herself primarily to kids. She was always doing stuff for high school kids, and a lot for, I think, a lot of people for maybe the underdogs. Probably was her particular niche. She was dubbed everybody's mom by the kids in the school system. When she retired from the school, they gave her a big celebration, and they gave her a sweatshirt that said everybody's mom. She would go to all the sporting events that she could. It wasn't uncommon for her to drive all over the state to be in Augusta for a cheering competition, and then run down to go to a Marshwood Lisbon football game the same day. And even though there wasn't any, she didn't have any kids my brothers and I had long graduated. She was Citizen of the Year, and so a lot of things like that. And
good-hearted woman.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, I think the best way to capture who my mom was, she died at a relatively early age. She had lung cancer, most likely from secondhand smoke, from which she used to be a waitress.
Yeah.
And we asked the school system if they would allow the pallbearers to be representative of all the high school teams, and of course that was something that was easily done. And we had a lot of people going through visiting hours, and one young man went through, and I knew him because my younger brother had worked with him as an assistant wrestling coach. And this young man had was a 3-time champion wrestler. And he looked at me and he said, Mr. Bennett, would it be all right if I pinned this on your mom? And I said, sure. And it was a state wrestling championship medal. And I said to the young man, I told him I'd make sure I got it back. And he got really stern. He said, don't you dare. I have 3. And the only reason I have 3 is because your mom was the only person who believed in me. And I want her to have that. And so it's a powerful, it was a very powerful lesson for me. And it's part of who I am, is we have these opportunities to make a difference in people's lives with the daily things that we try to do. And, you know, in a lot of ways, I'm highly driven by that. You know, I like what I do. I think I help communities become prouder of the communities where they live. Nobody wants to be embarrassed where you live.
Right, right.
You know, you just think about it. If you have a conversation with anybody, and how does the conversations go? First, you're going to hear a lot about their family or their friends. The second thing you might hear is about where they went to school, especially if they ended up going to college. I mean, that's, or their high school. I mean, you know, Tiger Pride it's not just a saying.
Right.
It's a real thing in this community. So you'll hear about that. But the third thing you're probably going to hear about is where they grew up. Everybody wants to be proud of where they live. Everyone wants to be proud of their hometown. And what they really want local government to do is help us be proud of where we live and make us safe.
Yeah.
And that drives a lot of what I do and where I've worked in my career.
Wow, Jim. Your mom really, from little on, and you have siblings.
I do.
How many brothers do you have?
I have a couple of younger brothers in my immediate family. My dad was married before he married my mom, so I have 3 half brothers from that. But for a lot of reasons, it's kind of an interesting story. I didn't really know that I had half brothers until I was in my mid-teens.
Wow.
Our family, my parents made the decision to make sure there was total isolation, and that we weren't aware of that.
That generation did do that.
Yeah.
As a protection.
Right.
Didn't want you hurt.
Right.
Wow. And you're married?
I am.
How long have you been married?
So let me back up a little bit. One of the things I've done for almost 20 years of my life is I'm an active member of the Shrine, and I'm also a clown. And so I'm an active member of the clown. In fact, my clown name's Jinjo, which is a combination of my mother's name to celebrate what she did for kids, and then Joe for Joe Graziano. Graziano Restaurant is where I used to work and manage, and Joe did a lot of things for kids. And so there's a certain amount of playfulness that's always underneath the surface here. So when I'll get asked about how long I've been married, I'll say something like 13 happy years. But technically, it's all been happy years.
Yeah.
And we just celebrated our 29th year.
Do you have children?
We do.
How many?
2. Our son Mitchell is 24. He is about 8 classes away from a double degree in marketing and finance at Orono. And he's currently living with us and you know, getting ready to go back to school. Our daughter Amanda is 23. She graduated from Bowdoin with a double degree in philosophy and government, and she is hopefully she wants to go on to go to law school, and she's currently working as the assistant finance director for the Maine Democratic Party. And just to sort of make sure that everybody understands, because of our code of ethics, I'm on the road, always being on the road. My son is a Republican, my daughter's a Democrat, so I think we have
I think that's great.
A bi-political family that often has some interesting discussions at the dinner table.
You know, I brought this up on another show, I think with Mike or that I remember the days when people could have a conversation without getting heated and angry about politics. And that is so rare nowadays. People get so heated and upset. But to hear this, I'm sure you guys have conversations, but I'm sure they don't get heated.
Well, it's more like the two of them have a conversation, and Deb and I just sort of listen. We don't get a lot of words in edgewise.
Oh, yeah, because they all have their opinions.
Yeah.
That's great. You know what I'm finding out, though, Jim, too, is since I've been at City Hall doing the council meetings and seen the public come in and that, the issue on parking, could you clarify that for people? Because there are so many misunderstandings. And could you clarify that?
Well, we'll take a shot at it.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things are more complicated than people think they are. And I don't say that to be able to imply that people are not capable of understanding. What I mean by that is unless you spend some time really trying to look at all the facts and beginning to think about how those relationships work, you may not necessarily understand the complexity of that. Sure. And so here's what you have that's currently going in the downtown. Historically, the downtown was predominantly built around walkers. You know, people, a lot of employees in the mill, a lot of the housing that was around in the downtown area. People didn't necessarily have vehicles and they'd walk, and it was predominantly that. Obviously, as the mills left, the downtown went into, like every other downtown across America, people left the downtown area as the principal means of shopping. They went to the malls. You know, everything changed, and we really became a society that was related to automobiles. There's now a reemergence of the importance of downtown, and our community is going through that as well. So you have a situation where you have a lot of vacant or underutilized space within the community, and you have a predominance now of people that want to use vehicles. And so you're trying to figure out how that's going to work. You know, the reality is the studies that we have done show that right now there's about 4,300 vehicles or demand for parking spaces in the downtown area, and including the private sector or privately owned lots and what the city owns, there's only about 2,900 lots. So we already have a shortage. When you take a look at all of the vacant space or the underutilized space, and then you work into including some of the mill areas and the redevelopment of Lincoln Mill and the 3 Lincoln Street and everything else, the reasonable projections are that we could have as much as 6,000 or 6,500 demand. And so what occurs is that if you strangle a downtown from a parking perspective, customers don't come.
Right.
And so you just think about your own experience. You want to go out to eat at a certain place. You want to go do something. You drive in that location. You can't find a parking place. You eventually kind of go around. You can't find a parking place. Right. Sooner or later, you get frustrated by that, and you no longer go. You'll go, I go to other alternatives. And so the challenge is, how do we work to be able to try to make sure that we do not get to that point? Well, the first assumption is that it's unreasonable to think that people are going to leave their buildings empty.
Right.
Or that they're going to leave them underutilized. And so as the market forces allow them to fix those up, they continue to do that, and more parking occurs. That means more of that parking spills over into the entire downtown area.
True.
And as that happens, you have more and more people that are parking in predominantly all day, and it doesn't allow your customers to come down. And so there are a couple things that we have looked at as we tried to wrestle with this issue. One is clearly there needs to be some more parking created. Now, ideally, that would be the private sector would take care of that. And I'll put that here on the side, if I could, Tony, for a second, and come back and talk about that. The second thing is we need to figure out how to be able to make it really easy for customers to come into the downtown area, to find an easy parking place, and then be able to do what they want to do and leave. And if you look at a business, no matter how cheap it is or the expenses are low for a business, if they don't have revenues, it doesn't matter, you can't pay your bills. And so what we have done is really try to focus on how do we try to have the least amount of impact on the revenue side of the equation and minimize the expense side, not the other way around in terms of what you try to do. And so what we have done, and again, it's from the guidance of the voters in the community, how do you make it so that all of every single on-street parking, so if you park on any street in this community, it is free.
Yeah.
No parking meters, no kiosks to make them pay, none of that. They're 100% on point in parking. I mean, I just had a discussion with a reporter that was asking me, why would you charge on nights and weekends for parking when Portland doesn't? And I said, well, Portland does. And then we got into the discussion a little bit. And what the reporter was referring to was on-street parking. And I said, well, we're better than Portland because we're not charging any on 24/7, so there's no parking there. And then what you're trying to do is you're trying to move all of the residents and all of the long-term parking into the parking lots or into private solutions. And then having the cost of that help support the parking garage that would be built, which actually increases the numbers, and get that off the property taxpayers. So that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Now coming back to the private second piece of this, private sector will not end up building the parking garage right now because the revenue stream won't support it. You don't have enough rent that's available to cover your cost for just your improvements primarily in the buildings. And then if you need to pay for the garage on top of that, the revenue stream doesn't cover it, and so they won't do that. You're not going to build a parking garage to lose money, and you're not going to upgrade your apartments or your businesses if you don't have the revenue stream to pay for it. You're already losing money. Why would you spend to make your losses worse? It's just simply economics, and so that's why the municipality has to ride into that. What's in it for the upside for the residents? As you think about increased evaluation, the more that the values increase in the community, especially in the downtown area, and if they have the revenues to go with it, the less that the residents have to pay. And so just in the last couple of years, the downtown area is paying almost $500,000 more in taxes than they were paying 3 years ago because of the increased valuation. We believe that number could be upwards to $2 to $2.5 million with all of the build out. That would allow those monies to help pay for things like infrastructure and the additional cost for ongoing expenses in schools and other areas and public safety without having to have the residents pay for it. But if you don't have the parking necessary to go along with the increase in the revenues, then you're not going to get the increased valuation. And so all that's related. The truth of the matter is that over the last couple of years, most of the single-family homes in the community have generally been pretty stable in terms of their taxes, and why we've increased revenue spending on capital improvements. We've gone up from a couple $100,000 to $1.5 million. Why we're doing more in terms of public safety and trying to deal with other issues. The school department is getting funded and doing some amazing things. Most of the taxes stayed the same, and the tax rate has actually gone down.
Wow. Why don't the public realize that? What are they missing? I mean, listening to you, it's all a growth, and it's all to help the community.
I think there are a couple of things, Tony. I think first, it is really clear in order to get the long-term gain, there's got to be some short-term pain. I mean, that's this is not going to that everybody wins and it's going to be free and it's going to be easy and simple. It isn't, because otherwise it would have been done a long time ago. And so there are some people that are really nervous and they don't necessarily see what potentially upside, or they just don't believe in it, and that's okay. Some people have just looked and say, I want everything to be the way it was.
So they're afraid of change.
Well, maybe, or they're just concerned the change isn't going to be the change that they want. I think you have some interesting discussions. I've had people that said, hey, I've been here for 30 years and I've never had to pay, and just make the new people pay. Well, there's a certain fairness issue that becomes a little tough to implement from a government perspective. I think there are legitimately some people that have just made it a position that they really don't want, for whatever reason, the current mayor or the current council or whatever, they just don't want anybody to be successful. I don't really understand that, but it's just there. Some of it's just simple. I think they haven't had time to think about all this stuff and look at it. And of course, there are other people that say just the opposite. And they try to, make people believe it's different than what it is. To be fair, this thing has moved on us a little bit. You know, some of the things that we put out as a city that we were going to do, we got additional information and we changed our mind. And I'll give you a great example of that. Initially, the first stuff we put out about the parking permits was if you got one, you could park in any of the lots. And as you thought about that, you know, nobody wants to buy a permit to park down on Water Street, for instance, and then get locked out of that and have to park all the way out on Washington Street. You know, I wouldn't pay for that. And we said, no, time out, you can't do that.
Right.
If you buy a permit and you're in a lot, you're going to be guaranteed your spot. We are not going to oversell it. We're not going to allow other people to park there. If other people come in and park illegally and you go there and you have a permit, the police will tow out whoever is the violator. If you buy a spot, you're guaranteed a spot, and you're guaranteed a spot in that. So to be fair,
there should be a comfort level in that.
Right, and to some degree, you know, to be fair, we've sent out some conflicting information that has not been helpful.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, when people come in to talk about their opinions on parking, or you know, I hear them a bit confused. And I watch people on the console try to clarify that. And it looks like that, you know, you're trying to help the shop owners. You're trying to help the people who make a living off of Main Street. And I just really can't see why they're so confused about that. I mean, they have a business there. There's been a lot of growth in town. You can see it. Now, the parking garage, that comes up periodically. Clarify that. Will the parking garage go up if we have more businesses coming in? Or are you going to put it up anyway and wait for the businesses to come? This is where I hear the confusion.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question because it's going to depend on what 5 of the members of the city council decide the answer. Yeah. Here's the interesting piece is a parking garage from the moment you decide you want to do a garage until it opens. Mm-hmm. If you have no hiccups and you have nothing that happens during the process, is about a 15-month to upwards of a 24-month period. And so let's assume that somebody makes the argument and says, okay, Jim, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think we're at the point now where I'm having customer issues. Mm-hmm. And so I don't like the fact that I'm going to have to pay for my employees, and my employees don't like the fact that I have to pay now because I'm not seeing the issue.
Yeah.
Okay? Fair. You
Right.
can say that, one
Sure.
end of town or whatever end of town. 6 months from now, all of a sudden, Lincoln Mill is now open and running, or some other event happens. We hear on a regular basis, another 50 employees have popped into a space. I can tell you right now that every single property of any significance in the community is currently under some level of discussion to be redevelopment. That includes things like the Saco Low building all the way out by, coming in on Route 1. Yeah. I mean, the old glove manufacturing building that's on the other side of Route 1. Every single major building right now has some level of real interest in redevelopment. And so the additional parking could happen very quickly.
Right.
Now everybody cries and says, Uncle, 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 I now see what you mean. Ooh, I should have paid attention to that. The problem is you're not going to be able to create the solution fast enough in order to make up for the difference.
Right.
And so most small businesses can't withstand a 15 or 20% drop in their revenue for very long. Right. Most of them can't do it for 15 months or 24 months.
Right.
And so at some point, as you're looking at this scenario, you have to be able to try to be ahead of the demand, not behind the demand. Mm-hmm. And you try to do it in such a way if you can, that you can make the financials work so that property taxes don't have to pay for it. And that's the sort of the magic sweet spot, I think, in terms of what we're doing. You know, from our perspective, I think we're in the right place and we're trying to hit it at the right time. At the end of the day, the city council is going to have to make the judgment whether we're in the sweet spot, we're too early, or we're too late, or whatever the case might be. And ultimately, I think the community also has to be kind of taking a look at that.
I can see, yeah, definitely. And I mean, seeing everybody putting in their opinion, and you're right, I mean, things can happen very quickly. All of a sudden, oh my God, we don't have parking.
Right.
I mean, from my point of view, you're planning ahead. From my point of view, you're weighing everything and you're taking the business owners into consideration.
I think,
I think
yes.
that's what I see.
And I think the other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to take a look at what the voters said to us in 2014
Yeah.
and understand what that meant. Now, there's going to be clearly people that voted for that or signed that because they have personal economic interests that they would rather not see any parking. So if I'm a business and I have no parking and I depend on the city, then I don't want parking anywhere.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's just take an example, Alex's Pizza. Alex Pizza had to solve their parking challenges, and they bought a building, and they tore it down and made a parking lot.
Right.
Well, the city's not getting the taxes anymore for that building. There's a little bit of a gap now. They had to do what they had to do to control their parking.
Yeah.
There's another pizza place is dependent, highly dependent on the city parking, and they expect the taxpayers to continue to provide free parking. Where's the fairness? Where's the equity issue in that equation? And you have all these underlying pieces of the puzzle as you think it through. And so what you try to do is figure out how is the magic way of being able to address all those public policy issues in a way that feels like it's fair and reasonable, but also keeps an eye on what it's going to do to the tax rate. I mean, at the end of the day, what people want us to do is they want us to be really thorough about trying to help the community be proud of itself, but not proud at the point where you're just reaching in their pocket and grabbing money and money and money.
Exactly.
I mean, being proud and poor is not necessarily a good way to go.
No.
And so what we're trying to do is really figure out a way to be able to help the downtown be something as a source of pride, any source of revenue to help lower the tax bills or stabilize the tax bills in the community.
And that makes perfect sense. I mean, now, for example, Kennebunkport, they have a revenue. They have all those little shops going on. We are starting and have been doing little shops where you can walk down the street. I think parking in Kennebunkport is difficult. And you're trying to avoid that.
We're trying to do the best we can.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's a conscious decision that you're going to make if you go to Kennebunkport. And I think people generally make the decision, I'm going to do whatever I got to do. And if I have to drive around a little bit, if I have to whatever, because I'm going.
Right.
You know, we're trying to make sure that that doesn't get to that. What we want to do is if you have a favorite barber, if you have a favorite restaurant, if you have a favorite whatever it is, and you have a relationship with that particular establishment, because the main relationships still count.
Yeah.
We don't want to create a situation where, because we haven't dealt with the parking issues, that you have to break up, that you go to somewhere else.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so, you know, I happen to have moved a few times. Both my wife and I, one of the big struggles we have is where are we going to go to have our hair cut and where are we going to go to have, and because it's a relationship.
Right.
And so we hope we don't end up in a situation where we have people that have those kinds of personal relationships, you know, the same relationships that Cheers had at the local bar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You have your favorite watering hole.
Yeah,
you don't
you do.
want it. You want to continue to allow people to make those choices.
And, you know, I really can't, as the community is watching our show today, and I'm hoping that you're understanding this is not against you. This is to help the community. This is to help you. I mean, if you have more questions on that, send us an email. Send Jim an email. Send me an email. I'll give it to Jim.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, getting everyone, I mean, looking around Biddeford, and you said it at the beginning of the conversation, there's a lot of unutilized space that is not being used, which you're trying to use, you're trying to incorporate, which is great. And hopefully people will walk away from this show understanding more. I mean, I watch you on the console, and you can jump into any topic.
I'm not supposed to, though. I've been told a few times. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've watched you jump into the airport or the community. You have knowledge of all, I think, all facets of the city. And that says a lot for you, for your character, for the council, because you care.
Well, you know, our job at the end of the day, and my job specifically, is to try to help the elected officials make good decisions. I will tell you that there was a time earlier in my career where I would say that my job is to help the council make the right decision. And the only right decision was through my lenses. And I've grown up and I've learned some things along the way and I've made some mistakes. And so our job is to help them make good decisions. And you know, I was thinking about it. You and I were talking a little bit about it prior to going on the air. You know, I've been at this game for almost 40 years.
Yeah.
And I've probably worked for upwards of 200 different elected officials. I can tell you with less than a handful in my career, I would deem as somebody that was trying to do something in their own self-interest or was driven by some less than ethical position. I can tell you I don't have any of those people that I work for this community. They're great people. And so if whatever decision they make is going to end up being the right decision for the community. And I have a lot of confidence in that. And we spend a lot of time on the management team and the community, making sure that the department heads understand that they get to make those decisions. And whatever decision they make, we're okay with. We're going to help them provide good information, try to point out what the impacts of that are, and then try to work with them.
With what you have described today, where you're coming from, your mom, I mean, the whole thing, I mean, you do not have a malice bone in your body, and the council members do not either.
Yeah.
But knowing you more than I know a lot of them, you're going forward. You're going, okay, this is the facts, this is the figures. I've watched you walk in with books like this. I've watched you spread them out and give the facts and the figures. And I've also watched you when you weren't sure of the answer. You always said, I see you writing a note, because I see everything when I'm on the camera. I see him writing a note, saying, I'll get back to you.
Yeah. You know, I think the vast majority of people in the community would make the exact same decision that the council members make if they had all the same information and or if they had all the same time that the council puts in. I think what most people fail to realize is for every hour you see a councilor on TV, there's probably 3 to 5 hours of prep work that they've done ahead of time. Right. And not only just the packages that we make available online, but asking questions and understanding the relationships. You know, for those that are game players per se, I describe being involved with local government as a lot like three-dimensional chess. And you have to understand how all the impacts at the different levels are and how they play. It's never as simple as it seems. You know, so. And whether you look at the complications of the opioid crisis, the homeless crisis, I mean, and those kinds of things. You think about, you know, just giving an example of homelessness. You know, we have a growing issue of homelessness in the community, and that's something that, you know, some people may not want to deal with, but we have to deal with it. Exactly. And so, you know, we have the people that are chronically homeless. that strategy is different than the fact that we have people that lived in this community for a very long time, have always lived in the community, don't have a lot of resources, and the rents are climbing on them.
Yeah.
And some people will say, well, it's because the city is trying to drive all poor people out because they're trying to make the rents go up. That's an oversimplification, obviously, of the issues. Whether the city was doing anything in the downtown or not, rents would have gone up because of the marketplace. And so you have those individuals that are now going, I don't have any place to live and I want to stay in the community. That's a different strategy we have to have in terms of dealing with it than the chronic homelessness issue. You have issues with people that are homeless but are not vested in the community. They come here because we have resources or whatever it is, and it's a different kind of strategy for that group. And then I think the most challenging, personally heartbreaking issue you have is that you have in every high school across America, you have kids that are homeless. They are underreported. They may be couch surfing, they may be doing other things. And that's a much different strategy you have to take a look at. Some of the stuff that I've seen says that if a child has gone to the 15th day of continuous homelessness, the chances that they will be chronically homeless increases multiple times. And so as you're looking at that and dealing with those issues, day 15 has got to be an important part of the goal. And the community's never really had to deal with the last three categories of any significance 3 years ago. I mean, the chronic homelessness issue is in every community, and so
it is. Yeah.
But these are new issues that we have to wrestle with, and we have to have a community and elected officials that can have a high level of dialogue around those issues, because the stakes are high.
Very high.
And you have to be able to take those people that are in the community that just want to end up making either political points or are generally negative, to use those as reasons why leadership is failing. And you have to discount that. That's not the same to say that when people say no, that they're negative. No is often a positive response to an issue because they see a different way to get to a conclusion. And the challenge is, as we work through that, is trying to figure out how do you deal with all that stuff and still move the community forward and still pay attention to the bottom line in terms of what people pay.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's complex in a lot of different ways.
And I don't think the community can understand, well, they understand it, but they don't realize there are many arms to what is being done in government here. And I mean, I know I've had a lot of people on the show from the soup kitchens, and I've had them on the show and letting the community know there is help for them. Right. There is a place for them to go.
Yeah, I think people's lives are busy, and I think people are, their own lives are complicated. Yeah. Their own challenges are difficult. We don't know what individual people are wrestling with in their own lives.
No, we don't.
And so for people to cue out of these high-level dialogues that are going on in local government, I think it's pretty common, especially if you're comfortable generally with where things are going. Exactly. And then when something intrigues your interest, you want to come in and get engaged on those particular issues and understand them. That's pretty typical. We are doing and continue to do more and more and more to try to figure out how to be able to reach out so that we can understand what people are thinking, what the concerns are, and try to be able to provide information. I think we're doing a better job than we did 3 years ago. I think that's in a lot of ways indisputable. We still got so much more to work to do on that arena, and we continue to try to learn how to be able to sort of engage. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting, well, not really interesting, I think it's, interest is not the right word, I think it's really the dynamic that's impacting local communities is that somewhere probably 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we walked away from collectively that community was about the community. It was about a sense of pride. It was about a sense of where I knew my neighbors and my neighbors knew me, and we cared about each other and we took care of each other. And, you know, we may not always agree, but at the end of the day, we had everybody's back.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, government became transactional. We became vending machines. And people started saying, I'm giving you X amount of money in this vending machine, and doggone it, you better give me that amount of services out. And if I get less services for what I put in, then government, you're failing me.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, we've lost sight that what we're really trying to do is have a sense of belonging, that we belong to something that's is as good and great about us individually and what we stand for together collectively.
It's very important.
And I think we got to figure out how to get back to that in some fashion. You know, that doesn't mean everybody agrees, but what that means is that we're all trying to go to the same place. And you think about society and all of the temptations and all of the distractions to make us isolated. I think that challenges even more. So whether you take a look at homelessness issue, you look at the opioid crisis, you look at some of the tension in terms of around racial issues, you take a look at sort of the social justice issues. At the end of the day, my feeling is that if we're doing better with this whole sense of community and working together, and in terms of trying to care for each other and take care of each other,
Right.
those issues would be less dramatic because there would be more neighbors that would be there to try to help each other, and more understanding, and quite frankly, more people would know about the people that need help, so that, you know, they wouldn't fall into that deep despair that is so traumatizing to so many families that are dealing with it.
It is, yeah.
And that stuff covers every age, every demographic, and it is the most undiscriminatory part of what goes on in our society, because it doesn't really care how smart you are, it doesn't care how much money you have, it doesn't matter what it took to get you to this point. It's going to grab you and it's going to impact all of your loved ones and that individual the same way. And I just believe we need to figure out how to get back to those roots.
I agree with you. Do you think, Jim, that what's going on in the world now, the media, which is, people are hearing it and they're getting more negative, and do you feel that's a big part of a conflict of what we're trying to do?
I don't think it is much of an impact at the local level, thank
Okay.
goodness, but it's starting to spill over into it. I do think people are beginning to model the behaviors that they see other, especially our federal delegation, not ours, but across the country federal
Right.
Representatives are doing, and I think that it becomes very difficult as people think that's the model you're supposed to use in a way to do that. I mean, I had the pleasure of being able to travel all over this world, looking at representing city managers and going all over the place to talk to different people across not only the country but all over the world. And I see what some of my colleagues in other parts of the country are having to deal with and how it's spilled over. I mean, thank goodness in Maine,
Yeah.
we still care about each other.
True.
And so my sense is it hasn't quite gotten that bad at the local level yet, but I'm concerned about it.
Do you feel that what you've learned throughout all of your travels, are there moments where it just spills over into your thinking, or do you go into a mindset, okay, this is what happened in this country or whatever? Do you compare that to here at all? Do you use that knowledge in any way?
Yeah, I'm constantly trying to figure out how to do a better job. I'm constantly trying to figure out what is it that I should be looking at or learning from. And so I had a pretty profound learning opportunity over the last couple of days. I got to see probably one of the most unique approach to chronic homelessness. And what they've done is they've set up, for a lack of a better way to describe it, an RV park. And the people that live in that RV park are chronic homeless, predominantly, about 80% of them. And they have small homes and they have everything else. Each of those individuals that live there pay rent. They have to, if they don't pay the rent, they're out. They have to, there are certain expectations go along with that, but those expectations do not include necessarily being clean or any of the other issues.
Yeah.
And the aha moment for me was that affordable housing is not the reason that chronic homeless are homeless. The thing that has put them over the edge is some unbelievable event that happened in their life where they lost their family.
Yeah.
And so they had no family support. And you think about when you see chronic homeless displayed within communities, they're always with other people that are chronic homeless. The human desire to not be isolated is a very powerful thing.
Yes.
And so when you become so in such despair that you don't have that, it changes all the dynamics.
You give up.
Right, and totally, and things changed. So when I was touring this particular facility along with a bunch of other real innovative thought leaders across the country, they had a death the day before in one of the 300 residents that lived there. And the people that were showing us and touring us showed this space that was a common space, and they had a place where the ashes from people could be put, and they would celebrate their lives. And they said, word passed that this individual who had been there for a long time had passed. And they had about 150 of the residents that came together to celebrate the person's life and tell stories or lies about the person.
Yeah.
And these were people that were chronically homeless that now had a place.
Yeah.
And that was very powerful in terms of understanding. So you're not going to build affordable housing, they're going to deal with that particular category. And that's why I said earlier, breaking up the individual categories and understanding what they are.
Exactly, exactly. And I'm sure that was an aha moment, because you're looking at people who perhaps lost everything, or they lost their family. They've given up. They don't know which way to go anymore.
Right.
And it breaks your heart.
Right.
It really does. Since we're running short on time, I can't believe time has gone so fast, because there's so much to talk about. How do we get over during the summer, people walking the streets in Biddeford? How do we get over this built-up fear some people have when they're afraid to come to Biddeford at night?
Yeah.
I mean, everything is, there is so many, you've got so many shops and food restaurants and everything. And I think it's getting much better.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, one of the individuals that went on this particular training with me was a member of the police department, and that person ends up talking to a whole bunch of different groups, and he's talking to a senior citizens group and home, and they were saying how afraid they were. And one woman said, I go out every day and I walk around the block and I take my dog for a walk, and I do it 2 or 3 times a day.
Right.
And the person said, have you had anything bad happen to you? Have you had anything that made you afraid other than you thought there was something there? And they said, no. And so if I tell you statistically there isn't anything that backs up your fear, and you haven't physically actually been afraid other than you think you're afraid, what's that say for you? And the person said, well, maybe I'm just, it's something. He said, can I take you with other places? Because here you are as an older woman by yourself, walking your dog, and parts of the community that people think are bad.
Yeah.
And you're doing it several times a day. You're my best example of why things are not what people believe. I think you have to do, continue to do all the visual things that you need to in order to make things better. I know we're probably going to be looking at trying to get more lights into the downtown areas so things are lit up more and they're not dark areas. I think you have to continue to tell the stories.
Do too.
Yeah, people get lost in numbers, but they don't get lost in stories.
Right.
You have to have the numbers to back up the stories.
Right.
And you just got to continue to hope that the business community can continue to make the investments. Nobody's ever afraid of an active business. They get a little nervous when they see an empty shop.
Yeah, they do.
And so, and if you have 2 or 3 empty shops in a row, then that changes your perception of what's going on. And so that's why, going full circle here, part of the reason that you want to be able to address these parking challenges and you try to do all the other things that you're trying to do in order to be able to make it so downtown is something that people aren't afraid of and they can be proud of, much the way it was when people's parents and grandparents were in the community, not too long ago.
Exactly. I mean, I moved up here in 2006. I've seen a tremendous change in that amount of time. And the work that has been done on Main Street and surrounding areas, and always informing the people, with the shows and, the city council having their meetings. I have never been in a community like this, ever in my life. I'm a New Yorker. When I moved here, when I moved to my area, it was people kind of stayed away for a while, but eventually I would find a plate of homemade cookies on my deck.
Yeah.
Or this or that. It's unbelievable. I've never lived in a community like this. And to be exposed to what I'm exposed to now, at the council meetings, I'm like a sponge. I'm eating it up. I'm watching everything. I listen to everything. And, conflicts or people not understanding, I think you're trying so very hard to make them understand. And perhaps soon they'll have an aha moment and go, oh, now I get it.
Right.
Where do you see 4 years from now, Biddeford and yourself?
Well, for me, I'm done moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is 7th or 8th community I've served, and my wife and I and my family have moved a lot. So I can't, in my wildest dreams, imagine that I'll take a city manager job anywhere else.
Right.
So I doesn't mean that I'm looking to retire. I've got plenty of road ahead of me before those days come.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that I'm still here and that we're still doing good things. We have an unbelievable opportunity to be able to change what people think of this community and return it to where it was in terms of the sense of close-knitness, where neighbors still know each other and they still care, where we can actively disagree and work through whatever the issues are and then come out on the other side and still be okay, because most importantly, we're all trying to do what we believe to be right for the community. And I will tell you, the Riverwalk and being able to get down along that river and the falls is some of the most magnificent natural gifts that any community could ever have. And for many, many years, that was essentially blocked off from the public. And what we're trying to do is give that back to the public. Whenever I traveled before, when I was traveling, I had the pleasure of serving as the president of the International City Managers Association, and so there were 14,000 members in 30 different countries. And so I'd show up. What would happen? The city managers would be there. Let me show you this really cool thing. They would always want to show me the thing that they were doing they were most proud of. So I've gotten to see some of the most unique, innovative different places or things through all across this, quite frankly, across the world.
Yeah.
So my perspective of walking down along that river walk and seeing what's there is not limited to Lewiston or Presque Isle. It's not limited to just the places I've been in Maine. It's broadened with things like being able to be in Austin or San Antonio, or to be in Sydney, Australia, or to be in New Zealand, to be in Santa Barbara, to be in Santa Monica. I mean, all kinds of different places, to be along the Gold Coast in Alabama, to be in Florida, to be in all kinds of different places. And it's a truly special place. And I think in 4 years that the community will have the opportunity to have that be theirs, and walk down there and see a downtown that they're very proud of and they're very comfortable. That's where I believe that we will be, and where I hope that people will want to be. And at the same time, we still have a great educational system, that we still have a public safety force where our police and fire still know people by first name basis. Our public trust our police department. They trust our officers. It's very clear that they have a relationship. I know, I was out helping to feed the crew during one of the big storms, and the public works guys were kidding around because they were out plowing, and they saw somebody that was struggling to try to walk, and they stopped and got out of the car to help the person get through the mess, in terms of help that person walk to get to their home. That doesn't happen in every other community, but that's the kind of employees we have here. And with all of that, we're still trying to make sure that we never lose sight, that we try to make what people pay for the least it can be, and something that they would say, it works for me,
Right.
So,
Right, it works.
long-winded, but I think that's the vision.
Jim, thank you so much
No
for
problem.
being on the show, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and, clarifying so many things. And, there's so many other things I want to talk to you about, but we've run out of time.
Well, we'll come back another time.
We'll come back another time.
Right.
And we'll have a different backdrop. Anyway, thank you again.
No problem. It was my pleasure.
And I want to thank everybody who was watching our show today. Like I mentioned, if you have questions or you want to follow up on any of our conversation, send us an email. Send Jim an email and ask your question. There's never a dumb question. You might be a little confused. We'll straighten you out. Anyway, have a good day, and thank you for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.